So thank you for choosing to be part of this spiritual community today, whether you're physically in this room or joining us online from somewhere. Today's the new month. We start July, and we start looking at our new monthly theme of sweet freedom. We get to look at what freedom means to us and how we experience it. Certainly, there have been events recently that have given us all the opportunity to pay attention to this thing we call freedom and decide what it means to us collectively. And last Sunday, after services, 9 of us gathered at the office for an extraordinary conversation about how the science of mind, or how religious science perspective or point of view lets us see and productively move through and make beneficial peace with and make use of the stuff that's going on in the world right now. And I feel grateful for every single person who showed up, because my world was enriched by that conversation. And when I asked everybody else, they said the same thing was true for them. And then, yesterday in daily morning practice, which is open to anybody who chooses to show up, just saying, the reading we used was from July's Science of Mind magazine, and it was written by Dr. Jim Lockhart. And in it, he was very clever. The thing for yesterday was our second most important relationship. And I believe it speaks to freedom. Dr. Jim started with 2 quotes, the first from Oriah Mountain Dreamer's The Dance, and the second from Dr. Holmes from his Anatomy of Healing Prayer. First, from Oriah Mountain Dreamer, living a life of fulfillment that offers something of value to the world starts with radical self-knowledge, self-awareness, and self-acceptance. Our task is to be who we are at the deepest level. And then the Dr. Holmes quote, and I'm going to have to back up a little bit, because those of you who were with us yesterday saw me stumble over this quote like every time I read it, because it didn't make sense the way it was written. So that quote comes from a talk that he gave sometime, somewhere, and he was talking about the consciousness of unity, or the consciousness of oneness. And the point is, the second we put the divine outside of ourselves, we've created separation. We've created duality. We've created a situation that doesn't actually exist, except it does in our imagination. And because it exists in our imagination, it exists for us. This is really a hard nut to chew, a hard idea for those of us who live in the world of form, which is everybody far as I know. So, Dr. Holmes, I'm backing way up from that quote from yesterday. It's very important that we realize that involved, incarnated, and encircled within us must be the potential of everything we shall ever evolve into. Remember that notion that the oak tree is already there, full, in that acorn? That's what we're talking about. We are God in form. We forget, but we are that acorn. Whether we've bothered to sprout or not, we're still God in form, or God in the germ was one of the old poets that said that. But that's what he's talking about, is we are already that. We just don't know it. We forgot. We have these other stories that tell us otherwise. Anyway, so hold that idea of acorn oak tree as I keep going. If that which is the cause of pure possibility, that which is the absolute and final and ultimate reality, is incarnate in us, then there isn't a part of it incarnate in us. All of it is. The search for divine unity, the realization of unity, necessitates the acceptance that there is no dividing line, We shall expand, progress, evolve ad infinitum, in sequence, from where we are to any stage that we ever become. Out of eternal being becomes everlasting becoming. Perpetually. It never stops. We're already there. We don't know it. We move in that direction. Back to Dr. Holmes. There has to be beings beyond us, as we are beyond tadpoles. You and I don't know what such a future evolution as we may undergo may mean. The potential of our future evolution is already inherent, latent, and in us, asleep. Or we are asleep to it. This is why I loved the song that David played, that I release and let go, because that spirit runs my life when I let it. And we forget, and we think we have to do it ourselves, and, we forget. So, back to Holmes. I'm struggling with this one. Hidden within us is everything we shall ever evolve into, and everything that is. That which perpetuates itself is this self. That which extends and expresses itself is capital I itself. There is no other self. There is no greater self descending to a lesser self. The idea that we have a higher self that we grow into is an expression of duality. We made that up. It's not true. We're already that. Back to Holmes. This is very important because we shall always go and search after it because we think we don't have it. And we'll go look where we think it may be found, this thing which we think we don't have. And wisdom, spiritual wisdom, starts the day when we know from now on every discovery is either a discovery of the self or related to the self in the cosmic mind. The self must raise the self by the self. We wake up to our divine inheritance, that presence that we already are. And the 6 of us that showed up for daily practice yesterday had a really long conversation around whether those self words were capitalized or not. And I changed my mind, actually, because yesterday I was arguing that only some of them were capitalized, but actually I think they all were, because all of them are our divine self expressing as us right now. And we make up a story that this is not the capital T truth. We don't know it, we don't believe it, and so it's not true for us. See this conundrum? See this puzzle that we're all of us are living in? And finally, I get around to the daily reading from Dr. Jim. The second most important relationship in life is with ourselves. Following from our relationship with, in, and as spirit, this relationship with ourself, both capitalized, sets the stage for how we exist and express in the world. When our relationship with spirit is sound, and our relationship with self is solid, we are ready to be of value to others and to see others in their own right. When we're aware of our connection with, in, and as spirit, we can accept ourselves as worthy, empowered, and capable. A strong sense of self-love is essential if we're going to be our best selves and have loving relationships with others. Indeed, our relationship with self, that self already present in us, determines whether we remain a child of God or mature into an adult of God. The child is in constant receivership, while the adult is capable of stewardship. The child is needy for attention, while the adult is capable of true compassion. The second step of spiritual mind treatment affirms our worthiness to draw all good from spirit. We are already empowered to realize our divine natures and to express powerfully and compassionately in the world. When we remember this, we live our truth. Therein lies the rub, right? So think about how you live right now. Think about how you own your God self as you right now. Is it different than you live? Speaking for myself, when I remember my God self, I second guess myself a whole lot less. And if I have any doubts or insecurities, I dump them because they're not true, they're not useful, they're not accurate. It's garbage thinking I have. And when I remember my God self as me, I experience more of that God-given freedom that's already true. What's true for you? Know the answer is going to change from minute to minute to minute and circumstance to circumstance because we're not, well, I speak for myself, I'm not consistent enough to live there all the time. I have moments. You do too, I'm sure. So finally, I get around to today's talk title, Sweet Freedom. Who has more freedom? That child or that adult? They're very different experiences, aren't they? And your answer depends on your definition. Children, generally, don't actually have true freedom. They have boundaries imposed by others because as children, their ability to discern and decide is limited. And their understanding of the consequences, the natural consequences that will happen, is limited as well. The adult, generally, has the awareness of what their limitations and boundaries are and where they come from and what the likely consequences are of those. And this idea, I have the freedom to do what I want without dealing with the consequences, is nonsense. Because we can't be free of that. That's not a choice. It's not on the menu. And it's not how the game of life is played. We do have freedom of choice. And with that choice comes the consequences. Just saying. So Dr. Holmes wrote in the Science of Mind text, page 143 and 144, we have the right to choose what we wish to experience. There can be no choice unless there is something from which to choose. Otherwise, the ability to choose would be merely a fantasy. Therefore, there must be not only the possibility of choice, but the liability of experiencing that which was chosen. We have a right to choose what we shall induce in mind. Think about that. We induce in mind. We decide, we induce. We have a right to choose. The way in which our thoughts become manifest, we cannot always see, because effect is potential in cause. Cause and effect are really one. We have set a given cause in motion. The effect will have to be equal to the cause. One is in the inside, and the other is the outside of the same thing. He goes on. A certain specific concrete idea in mind will produce a certain specific concrete manifestation equal to itself. There is one principle, one infinite thought stuff, one infinite creative power, but countless number of forms which change as the specific idea behind them changes. So we're back to that consciousness of unity, right? One, 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 one. We come into the world of form having already been given freedom, the freedom of the divine. We have to believe that we have it, though, and we have to accept it. We have to take it. We have to live it. I have two more quick ideas that I want to say before I stop talking. And the first is an idea that comes out of psychology. And that idea is called confirmation bias, which basically means we pay attention to and notice ideas which align with our deeply held beliefs. As humans, we automatically select information that supports our viewpoint. We don't do it on purpose. It's just how it happens. And we ignore any information to the contrary. If I believe the cops are out to get me because I'm something, then I will be stopped because that's what I've decided has to be true. Boy, that sucks. And it is a given, right? It's like that cause and effect thing. I have decided, therefore I must experience. Confirmation bias is the mechanism. It's the technique. It's the process. It's the tool that's already in play that delivers to me what I'm thinking. So if you look at your life and you're looking at something that isn't like you want, it's like, I wonder what's behind that. I wonder what I want to consider differently because I'm not liking this experience at all. And it doesn't mean, like I have said 3 weeks in a row now, it doesn't mean I'm going to win Dancing with the Stars because I really have trouble clapping, much less left foot, right foot. But we have this gift already given. We have this built in. It's included. Confirmation bias. So what do we do about that? Well, the psychologists tell us that confirmation bias cannot be eliminated, but it can be managed and it can be used. And how do we use it? We learn and we think. And I would add, in New Thought teachings, one of the best ways confirmation bias can be managed is by noticing what we don't like in our world and creating the mental equivalence we want instead, which is a special trick that's just ours. Holmes wrote in the section I read out of the Science of Mind text, the inside and the outside are the same thing. What I think about, what I believe about that will show up in my experience. It has to. Our freedom lies in our ability to choose a different experience by changing my focus, by changing our focus. And creating a new mental equivalent is the most powerful way I know to do that. So what do I mean by creating a new mental equivalent? This is like one of my most favorite topics. Mental equivalents were codified in the English language by Judge Thomas Troward. He didn't make them up. He was the first one to describe them. And he probably got them, he gleaned them from his lifelong studies of the Hindu sacred texts, which he studied while he was working as a judge in India for like 40 years or something. This one idea is the basis of mental science. And in short, if we can imagine something fully and completely and hold our attention on that, never changing our focus, we can bring it into our experience. Simple but not easy, right? Everyone has the skills already that they need to do it. All it takes is consistent, persistent practice. I'll leave you to ponder mental equivalence for now, and I'll be back to it later this month because it is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I'm going to close with some words from Dr. George Bendel, who worked with Dr. Holmes and was a minister at Founders Church in the late 50s and 60s. He gave a talk about freedom that was preserved in a little book called Holy Days and Holidays. Bendel wrote, "We have strength in our teaching because while we may seem bound to all kinds of circumstances, situations, experiences, and effects, even all kinds of despair and all kinds of crises, and while we can suffer our way through these, there all of a sudden comes to our realization we have the right and the freedom to mentally move away from these conditions." And at the very end of his talk, he shifts his awareness. He shifts his mental equivalent to that which he desired for himself and for his community. We break the confines of what someone else thinks, and we manifest the spirit of a loving, living God within us. We feel it, we set it in motion. And now in our imagination, we feel the embrace of the infinitely loving God. And we are able to embrace everyone else because we feel that embrace ourselves. We feel for a minute that our arms are around the world and all the activities in it. We are not hopelessly crying out in the night. We have the freedom to realize that God sustains and directs us. We feel a blessed peace. We feel a sense of wholeness. And we know that all substances in our life respond to this feeling. So we dissolve the bondage into the glory of this new day. And we know that everything that seemed to give us suffering is now released and surrendered. The light of God touches every part of our being. Feeling this and accepting it, we speak for ourselves, for our loved ones, for all of life, knowing the harmony of this moment now touches everyone. It's a big order. We have what we need. We can do this. We have to decide we want to. Decide how much you feel you're up to, and then add a little more. Because we have to imagine the world we wish to create before we can experience it. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So I'm going to roll on into the prayer, and if I said something useful for you, imagine it. Hold it in your mind while I speak the words. I live as this one life, as me. I know that same truth for and about all beings. There is no one who lives outside of this whole and holy presence. There is no experience in life that is outside the reach, the touch, the impress of this divinity. Each individual has the capacity to call in the good they desire, without exception. And so, for me, I know that I take this task on, I take this challenge, I take this remembrance of freedom as me, of life and love and joy and peace and power, and God as me. And I live it. And I know that same truth, that same option, that same reality is available to each and all. And so as each one does this, the world changes because the inside and the outside are the same. God as me, God as each one turns the world. So I remember to stand in the space of love. I remember to stand in the space of joy and power and peace and whole holiness. And I take a breath, and I allow, and I release, and I accept, and I surrender to this goodness. And I let it be. And so it is.
So it is.